Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Hello there.
Today we are diving into, well, a pretty fundamental question. Is crime an objective thing? Something just out there?
Or is it maybe something society itself constructs?
Exactly. Now, we've looked at structural theories before, right? How the bigger picture, the societal framework, might shape behavior.
Yes, that perspective, looking at the large-scale social structures.
But today we're taking a really different approach. We're moving into social action theories.
Right, focusing more on individual interaction and interpretation, how people make sense of things.
And specifically, we're looking at interactionism, how people interpret and react, and a key part of that, labeling theory.
It's a fascinating lens.
So our mission for this deep dive is really to understand how and why certain people and certain actions get defined, get labeled as criminal or deviant.
And crucially, what happens after that label is applied, the consequences,
Which can be profound, often quite unsettling. It really brings the power of perception into sharp focus.
Absolutely. And what's really, I think, transformative about labeling theory is how it redirects our whole focus.
How so?
Well, instead of the usual question, why do people commit crimes? Which, let's face it, tons of theories try to answer.
Right, the traditional approach.
Labeling theory flips that completely. It asks, how and why do certain acts and the people doing them get tagged, get labeled as deviant or criminal?
Ah, okay. So it's less about the initial cause and more about the societal reaction.
Precisely. The focus shifts from the act itself to how society responds to it.
That's a really powerful distinction. So if an act isn't inherently deviant, what makes it so? And who's doing the labeling?
Well, that leads us straight to someone like Howard Becker.
Ah, yes, Becker. He had that incredibly sharp quote, didn't he? Something like,
deviance is not a quality of the act the person commits,
but rather a consequence of the application by others of rules and sanctions to an offender. Yeah, that's the one.
It's quite radical when you first hear it, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
Because instinctively, we think some things are just wrong, plain and simple. But Becker forces us to stop and think, wait, maybe that wrongness is actually a social judgment.
And importantly, a judgment often applied by those who have the power to make it stick.
Like the police.
Yeah.
Or a judge.
Exactly. Those in positions of authority, or sometimes even just the dominant social groups.
Which, okay, that immediately brings up questions about fairness, doesn't it, and power?
Absolutely. Becker was very clear that this labeling process, and even how the law is applied, is far from equal.
It's not a level playing field.
Not at all. Whether something gets labeled criminal can really depend on who does it, where they are, and crucially, who sees it and how they interpret it.
So it's not just about the action itself. It's the context.
The context, the social position of the person involved. It all plays a part.
Right. It reminds me of that classic example Becker often used.
The working class kid versus the middle class kid?
Yeah, exactly. A young person from a, say, working class background does something minor, maybe gets into a bit of trouble.
And they might immediately get labeled a troublemaker, a delinquent.
But then a middle class kid does the exact same thing.
And their parents, or maybe even the authorities, might just dismiss it. Oh, it's just a phase.
It's being kids.
Right. The act is identical, but the social status, the interpretation by observers, it changes everything.
The label applied is completely different. Yeah, that's quite sobering when you think about it.
It really is. And then if we follow that through, what happens once that label is applied, once it sticks?
The consequences can be massive for the individual, can't they? It can really change their whole life path.
Definitely. And this is where it gets particularly interesting and maybe a bit concerning.
How so?
Well, first off, that label, criminal, deviant, whatever it is, it can become what sociologists call a master status.
A master status. What does that mean exactly?
It basically means it overrides all other aspects of who that person is. It becomes the primary way society sees them.
Wow. So like a young person might be a student, a son or daughter, a friend. But once they get publicly labeled, say, a gang member or a delinquent,
that becomes their defining characteristic. That's all people see.
All those other identities just sort of fade away.
They often get pushed into the background, yes. The label dominates perception.
Okay, I can see how that would be incredibly damaging.
And it gets worse. When someone starts to internalize that label, that master status...
They start believing it themselves?
Yes. They start to see themselves through that negative lens society has provided. And this can lead directly to a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Ah, the self-fulfilling prophecy. So they start acting in the way people expect them to act.
Precisely. If everyone treats you like a delinquent, if that's the feedback you're constantly getting, you might just start living up to that expectation.
Which paradoxically means more deviance, more crime.
Exactly. It creates this cycle that's incredibly hard to break out of. The label itself generates the behavior it supposedly describes.
So it's not just about the individual being affected. Does this labeling process have wider ripples? Does it impact society more broadly?
Oh, absolutely. And that brings us to another really key concept: deviancy amplification.
Deviancy amplification.
Oh.
Okay, tell me more.
This idea comes largely from Stanley Cohen's work, particularly his famous study of the mods and rockers back in 1960s Britain.
Ah, the mods and rockers. Yeah, I've heard of that. What did he find?
Well, he observed these initially fairly minor scuffles and conflicts between these two youth groups, seaside towns, bank holidays, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But the media picked up on it. And they didn't just report it, they sensationalized it. Big headlines, dramatic pictures.
Creating a bit of a frenzy.
A full-blown moral panic, as Cohen called it. Suddenly, everyone was worried about these folk devils threatening society.
Right, and what happened then?
Well, this public outcry put pressure on politicians, on the police. They felt they had to act, to crack down.
So more police presence, more arrests.
Exactly. More focus on these groups. And here's the crucial part, the amplification loop.
Go on.
The increased police attention and the continued intense media focus didn't actually reduce the conflict. It arguably made it worse.
How?
It drew more people in, maybe solidified the group identities, led to more confrontations because of the heightened tension and scrutiny.
So the reaction itself amplified the deviance.
Precisely. More fights, more arrests, which then got reported in the media, fueling more panic, leading to more crackdowns.
Yeah.
It became a spiral.
Wow. So the media and the authorities weren't just passively observing, they were actively, if unintentionally, creating more of the very thing they were trying to stop.
That's the core of deviancy amplification. The societal reaction magnifies the problem. It's a powerful example of labeling's broader effects.
That's fascinating and quite a warning, really.
It is. And speaking of reactions and labels, there's another important distinction made by Edwin Lemert that helps clarify this process.
Okay.
Lemert talked about primary versus secondary deviance.
Primary and secondary deviance.
Right.
How do those differ, and why is that distinction important here?
Well, Lemert's insight was that not all acts we might call deviant have the same consequences for the individual's identity.
Okay.
Primary deviance refers to acts that, well, they haven't been publicly caught and labeled.
So things people might do, maybe break a minor rule, but nobody really makes a big deal out of it.
Exactly. They're often trivial, maybe even quite common. Think minor speeding or, experimenting with something once. The key is it hasn't resulted in a societal reaction and labeling.
And it doesn't really affect how the person sees themselves.
Generally, no. It doesn't have a significant impact on their self-concept or their status. It's just an act, an isolated incident, not who they are.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's secondary deviance then?
Secondary deviance is where the labeling process really kicks in. This is the deviance that occurs after the person has been caught, publicly identified, and labeled as deviant.
So it's a response to the label.
Yes, it's a direct result of the societal reaction and the application of that label. And this is where it connects back to what we were saying earlier.
About the master status and the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. This secondary deviance can become central to the individual's identity. They start to organize their life and their sense of self around the facts of their deviance.
So it's no longer just something they did, it becomes part of who they are, both to society and potentially to themselves.
Precisely. The label has transformed the person and their relationship with society, often leading to further deviant behavior as they embrace or are pushed into that labeled role.
That distinction really highlights the power of that public naming and shaming, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It shows how the reaction is often more significant than the initial act itself in shaping a person's future path.
So, to sort of pull this together, we've taken this deep dive into labeling theory. And from this interactionist viewpoint, crime isn't some fixed objective thing. It's largely seen as a social construction.
Right. It emerges from social interaction and the meanings people attach to behavior.
And the process of labeling someone or something as deviant or criminal has these really powerful effects.
Huge effects. We've talked about the master status, how a label can just take over someone's identity.
And how that can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies where people live up or down to the label.
And even societal level effects like deviancy amplification, where the reaction actually makes things worse.
It's such a different way of looking at crime compared to structural theories, isn't it?
Completely. It really shifts the focus onto power, who gets to label whom, and the critical role of social reaction in defining what crime even is.
Which leaves us, I think, with a really provocative thought for everyone listening. If deviance truly is, as Becker put it, a consequence of the application of rules and sanctions, if it's the label that matters so much, what does that really imply about the foundations of our justice systems?
That's a big question.
And maybe even more personally, what does it suggest about our own roles every day in defining what and who we consider criminal or deviant in our interactions?
Yeah, something to definitely think about. How much do our own perceptions contribute to these processes?
Food for thought. Something to mull over until our next deep dive.